Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I start with the name of God, the All-Merciful, the Compassionate. While everyone in the entire world was busy dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and the preparedness to come out of the lockout and go back to a phased normal life, all of a sudden, the name George Floyd became a household name that everybody is talking about, but unfortunately, it was talked about within a sad capsule. We all saw the video footage with him just saying his last words, "I cannot breathe." This statement that was echoed about 6 years before in New York by Eric Garner, also killed by white policemen saying, "I cannot breathe." Now everybody is using this as an expression of anger. What is happening to the world? What is happening to the world? Today with me, I have a person who happens to be the chairperson of the London Police Services Board in his capacity as a councillor serving on London City Council representing Ward 3, a person of color, a person who's coming from Sudan 20 years back, a person that is a celebrated activist. Everybody knows Mo Salih in London, Ontario. And I want to, just for a qualification of this conversation, that this had to be a pre-recorded conversation because of the heavy schedule that our friend, our brother Muhammad Salih had to commit to. So we had to pre-record this. And there were some questions actually that were sent since we started to advertise for this conversation. Muhammad, welcome to Islamica.
Assalamu alaikum, and thanks for having me, Dr. Munir El-Kassem.
Muhammad, I want to start by saying this, that facing racial discrimination, people fall under 4 categories. There are people who practice racial discrimination. They impose it on others. There are people who are victims of racial discrimination. There are people who talk about racial discrimination. And there are people who are indifferent. They couldn't care less. Which category of those do you identify with?
I think the sad reality for myself and many other Black people in our community is that, I have been subject to racial discrimination, and too many people in our community, in the Muslim community specifically, are victims of racial discrimination. And it's something that needs to change, and it's something that enough of us have said enough is enough.
Well, this is, absolutely correct. However, I would like to say that many people argue that with you being of color, with you being elected to city council, that there's no racial discrimination in London, Ontario. Yet I would like to quote something that you said a couple of days ago. London isn't innocent. Anti-Black racism is here, and at times it even thrives. How could you explain this with you being at the helm of the London Police Services Board?
It's been a privilege to serve on the London Police Service Board for 2 terms, and now moving on to continue to work on City Council. I think the reality is people need to recognize that I happen to be an individual success story. There's many people who have tried to run for office. There's been many people who tried to achieve different offices in the city of London, whether it's on the bureaucratic side, whether it's on the corporate side, but racial discrimination, biases, and anti-Black racism has been a barrier and has been a reason why many people haven't been able to exceed and have opportunities in the city. I'm fortunate. I've been able to break through some of those barriers, but those barriers are sometimes an everyday reality. And you're right, I said it before and I'll say it again, London is not innocent. 100% I reject the idea that people think and to excuse London as if racism doesn't exist because we have a couple of examples. We can look at any community, whether it's in the US with the former President Barack Obama being elected. Look at America today. Whether you want to look around our province and people of color, Black leaders being elected in different communities, but in those same very communities, we see high rates of racism. Whether we want to look at people from the Muslim community who are elected, and they still face Islamophobia and they still face discrimination in their own communities, in their own ridings, in their own cities, in their own wards. And I don't have to really remind many people in our Muslim community because many have been subjected to Islamophobia, whether it's at the grocery store, on the bus, walking down the street. And unfortunately for our sisters in particular, because they are a visible face of our Muslim community when they wear their hijabs, they are targeted and they are subjected to Islamophobia and to hate.
Now, with you being a success story, some people claim that you did that out of mere luck. Do you agree with that? Were you just lucky to break through those barriers, or you followed a certain way that others may emulate?
I think hard work was definitely the first thing. And I believe I mentioned this to you. I know, Dr. Munir, when I came to the Islamic Center after how, and you introduced me and Councillor Zafman shortly after we were both elected.
I remember that not too long ago, yes. Yes.
And I know for the audience here today from the Muslim community, they'll particularly appreciate this and having the understanding. But even as I was knocking on the last doors on my first time on being elected, and knowing that I had to get to the London Convention Center to find out the results, and my team and my manager, they were like, you gotta hurry up and get down here. And I said, hold on, I have to go and pray. I have to pray Maghrib. And I stopped everything, dropped everything to make sure I did that. And then alhamdulillah, by the time I got to London Convention Center, there was celebrations and, it was big and many people embraced me and we were able to celebrate, as well as I was able to share the good news with you. And then you made sure to introduce us to the Islamic Center as the new counselor.
Yes. Okay, I always express pride, wherever I go outside of London. I mention you as an example where the city of London embraced you, and you continue to be active within the different levels of activism, and everybody knows that you have praise be to God, a dynamo of energy that we hope will continue. However, we cannot deny now, and I would like to take us in the remaining half an hour through something that will lead to an outcome, to a solution. Racism has existed in the world for a very, very long time. And it is not only whites against blacks, or people of other faith against Muslims, or there is racism that is inherent in human nature, and God sent us the final message of Islam to be a kind of vaccine against racism. And God declared in the final message to humankind that, "O humankind, we created you from a pair, from a male and a female, and multiplied you unto nations and tribes so that you may get to know one another." Yet there are even Muslims who are racists. There are people of racism does not recognize religious identities. There are people who have this sickness, and we are seeing it in different shapes and forms and things. What did you feel when you first saw that footage of that policeman putting his knee over George, neck? What did you feel?
I would say, Brother Munir, Brother El-Kassem, it was definitely an overwhelming feel of grief, and at the same time shock, but not so much shock in the sense that, unfortunately, we've seen this before, and we've seen this kind of violence, and we've seen a tragic end to someone's life. And so my brain is trying to process this all. And, you think of everyone in your life that, in particular, that, could be that victim, that could be George Floyd. And it's hard to really try to find the right words of how you feel in that moment. And even still, how many weeks now or days, still trying to really best describe those very feelings, because there's just so many feelings. There's anger, there's frustration, there's just why does this continue to happen? And we know, all is really that it needs to change. And when I said earlier, enough's enough, and we need to move past just saying, look, this is a bad thing that has happened. We need to see tangible things that will bring about change. And alhamdulillah, I'm optimistic in my nature. I'm just the optimistic person. I always believe that, inshallah, things will get better. But I know that we can't just say, inshallah, that we have to put in the work, and we have to make the effort. And all of us collaboratively need to recognize that this is a problem and this is real. And we all have a role to play, every single one of us, especially us in the Muslim community. And I'm glad you really touched on the fact that, us in the Muslim community, we also have a history, and we also have a presence where we have to recognize that there is racism in our own community, and we need to be conscious of that. And we need to say, well, what can we do? How can we identify the problems? And in some cases, people know that they're doing that, but in some other cases, people don't even realize or are aware of the fact that they are imposing their biases or having an impact or demonstrating racism towards the Black community.
Mohammed, in preparing for my conversation with you, I searched the net for the incidents that were similar to what happened to George Floyd. And I saw that things keep repeating themselves. People get angry, they take to the streets, then within a week, 10 days, things just die down. Do you see a similar trend that things may get better now? And I'm not here advocating that we should continue to see the looting and the destruction, because one unfortunate thing that people who are propagating racism and white supremacy are always saying that, see what those people are doing, that these are, as the president to the south of our border, went public by saying, he called them names because he only took out of this anger what happened by looting and by attacking, police, and by doing all kinds of things. And this is not what the Black Lives Matter movement is all about. And this is something that we really need to advocate in a positive way. How do you see things progressing as we move forward? Is it going to be another bubble that will burst and then it's back to fire under the basically surface? What do you see happening?
I mean, I think in every instance, in moments like this, even though when we look back and we say there's still a lot more work that needs to be done, when you look and you think about the 60s, and when you think about, after Rodney King, and when you think about even 5 years ago, after each of those instances, unfortunately, that they had to happen in the first place, there has been some progress. Whether it's an inch, whether it's 2 inches, it has been some progress. And I would say, from my perspective, I would say things do feel a little bit more different in this time, in the sense that people are really, really pressing on the fact that, it is beyond overdue, and that there needs to be systemic and monumental change and revolutionary change on the front of making sure that this is something that doesn't happen again. And we're seeing some different responses this time. I can't predict what next week will look like or next month. The reality is, I know, sadly, on my short time living on this earth for over 3 decades, that the reality is it's a marathon, that tomorrow or even next year, it's not going to be just overnight and successful, because the reality is there's just so many pieces that need to be addressed, whether it's on the policing side, whether it's on corporate world, whether it's just every day, the microaggressions that Black people face and the anti-Black racism that exists. It's so deeply embedded into the community. You know, and people in Canada in particular want to say, no, that's not Canada. We're not like over there. But the reality, racism has very, very deep roots. It's deep, and its roots are long. And we know, we've seen it with the Indigenous community, that this is a long time. But I'm hopeful, and inshallah, continue to make dua and continue to do the work that needs to be done. And I think when you touched on the fact that when people try to frame the frustrations and the peaceful protests and try to label them as just rioters or looters, obviously the reality is some of that in some small effect is happening. But the reality is it's nothing new for people who are Black, because we get labeled quite often. They'll say, look at those Black people who are doing all these bad crimes and things like that. But the reality shows, and the stats show, that that's not the case. And that's just people using, whether it's a wedge, whether it's just tools of racism to oppress or to change public opinion, and to really kind of quell people from coming out, and from people showing their frustration and demonstrating and fighting for change. Because the reality is 99.9% of the community, in particular the Black community, is just simply wants to be treated with respect, treated as equal. We're not just looking for equality, they're looking for equity, and they're looking for change, and they're looking for the system to change. And we're not looking for it to change next year, we're looking for it to have changed from yesterday.
See, the sad reality as well is that in all the previous cases, the you know, those who committed the crime were acquitted. You know, and some people are already talking about that policeman could be acquitted as well, saying that his intention was not to kill, that he was basically trying to maintain order, that, you know, probably George died because of a heart condition or whatever. And then we will see the same thing propagated again. Now, just imagine that you were the chair of the Minneapolis Police Services Board, and you were at the helm there right now. What would you do?
I mean, I think as anyone in leadership has a responsibility to one, get the facts, get as much information as possible, and to understand what went wrong and how did we get to this place in that particular situation. You know, at times, you know, we recognize that investigations are sometimes separate from police service board or the bureaucratic side or the politicians. And sometimes that's a positive. But at the same time, it removes us from being able to have that deeper conversation and bring that lens, because sometimes the people who are maybe looking into the situations don't have a true understanding or appreciation to consider some of the motivating factors that led to the death of the person, because maybe they don't have that lived experience, or maybe they choose for whatever reason to move in a different direction. But if I was in Minneapolis, I think it'd be very difficult. I wouldn't say that I'd be able to do a perfect job, but I would think that, you know, I would do my best to be there to support the community, to get us through the difficult time, to say, what are we going to do tomorrow and moving forward? What gaps do we have locally in the policing world that needs to change immediately? And what can we do long term? And talking to the people on the front lines, the grassroots folks, the activists on the front lines who do have a lot of really great ideas, who have been saying the same thing for many, many years, but people just refuse to not listen to them. You know, in the past, people have said there needs to be more training and better appreciation. And for many years, people have been slow to bring about that training because they'd say money, the time, or not even understanding the merit of having the training, because that you can train someone as much as you want, but if someone doesn't believe in it or isn't bought into it, then it doesn't matter, because Munir, Uncle Munir, you know better than anyone. If someone doesn't want to be at the mosque, but you make them come in.
Absolutely. So, and you brought me to what I want to mention next, and that is education, the importance of starting right at the bottom and keep going up, because it seems to me that we are dealing with the disease, with the illness, by treating the symptoms only, when we really need to have a long-term plan as well as short-term in order to deal with the situation. It's very, very important that we look at the teaching material, how those police are trained. Coming back to the Canadian landscape, do you expect that whatever is happening in the USA may spill over to Canada? Will we see similar incidents in big metropolis like Toronto, Montreal? What's your expectation?
So I think, the reality is we live in such a global world now, in the sense that everybody's connected and we learn from one another. So I think, when something happens across the world or across, just south of us, I think we're not really separate from it. It is our realities, and I think when something good happens in policing, whether there's a new way of doing something, other police services try to learn from that, right? So I think, because they share knowledge and they say, well, we've done this and this has worked. So whatever positive outcomes, come out of this from the US, I think people up here and people here in London will be paying attention and will be saying, well, what can we do? And vice versa, because I think we have led on many fronts here locally on saying what we could do, even before these instances, to better prepare people and to ensure that we have, a more responsive service that doesn't find itself necessarily in some of these instances. But the reality is you can do as much as you can, but unfortunately there is some unfortunate incidents and unfortunate acts of racism that continue to happen, and there's still a lot of work to be had. And I think reality is I'm not always going to be the one, or many others who are sitting around the table, if you will, who will have the answer, because a lot of times it's going to be the people who aren't sitting at the table who have the best answers. And right now is really important to get those voices in the forefront and do what we can to hear what those folks have to say. And, that's what I've been continually been doing, on my term as councillor, when I was on the police service board, to really have a pulse of what the community is saying, what people on the ground are saying, and how they're feeling, and what they think is the best direction of moving forward. And what's great, as you said, is what's happening in the US and kind of the suggestions and ideas that some of the activists are talking about, they're sharing freely. No one's charging you that information on social media, and they're saying this is what needs to change, this is what needs to happen. And you're seeing some cities act on some pieces, and you're seeing things starting to shift and move. And sometimes Canada can, up here we could be a little bit slower at responding to things, because again, people feel as if it's not as bad here, or it's not our reality. But the reality is it is as bad, and it is our reality. And, someone who doesn't live it, who doesn't have to walk the shoes of another person, in particular in the Black community, you don't have that luxury, or, you don't have that right to tell them how they should or shouldn't feel and how significant or insignificant it is, because the reality is it's significant. And it's something that, many people in our community have to talk to their children about, and who are worried and have many concerns about their children when they go out and about, and are apprehensive and anxious.
Okay, one thing that is really comforting, that in the images that we've been seeing coming out of the demonstrations and expressions of dissatisfaction and anger, that it's not only people of color who are really expressing their rage at what happened, but it is, people of different backgrounds, whites, Hispanics, Europeans, Arabs, you name it. And that is something that is just, sometimes I like to throw ideas just like this by brainstorming. I can see Muhammad Salih maybe starting something in London similar to the Black Lives Matter movement, by reaching out to the people who elected you, and these are the people who really are going to provide the kind of support that will help. So could you see that happening by you spearheading, call it a movement, call it a project, call it something that will really help to spread love, to spread acceptance, to spread mutual respect among different strata of our, at least starting in London, Ontario?
You know, I think here specifically in London, alhamdulillah, we're fortunate that we have seen that in the past, and we are seeing that in these days where we're having these young people who are doing what they can and who are starting to do the work and hoping to have a positive impact. When I think of myself, I have a role to play, and will always try to have a role to play, which is really, you know, part of it's on the governance side and really connecting and bringing people together, as you said. But also I have a responsibility as someone who, you know, it'll sound weird to some people, but now I have some privileges as an elected official. And so it's always important for me to recognize that I need to make space for those new voices and those people who have some really amazing and progressive ideas. And I think finding ways to continue to support those folks and to amplify their voices is things that people like myself and you can continue to do, because we have these very strong, great leaders. And it's just, the problem is, you know, we sometimes don't tap into them for resources and aren't necessarily connected to them. So I think people like me and you have a responsibility to share that message and share those ideas and strategies. In particular, just like with the upcoming rally, I think people in the community being able to be connected with those young folks and hearing the message and following the information that's being put out by them and learning from them and being educated. And also, I think the responsibility shouldn't be always put on the Black community in particular. I think the reality is like you did yourself, you went and educated yourself, you did the research, you did the homework. I think if other members of our community can continue to do what you do, you know, I think we'll be in a better place, because, you know, I can't expect everyone to understand my reality. You know, I don't understand your reality, but what I could do is I can have conversations with you and I can educate myself and I can do the homework to try to have a little bit of a better understanding. And then from that, I can go and say, well, what can I do in my capacity to do something that will bring about some change?
And that's actually, you know, you're pinpointing on what we should do, because the initial phase of expression of anger, which is natural, should give way to a wiser way of dealing with the issue, you know, as we move forward. And you referred, you know, in your answer to the rally that's taking place on Saturday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at Victoria Park. You know, and I, you know, I'm really glad that it was organized by 4 students, high school students, who did not want this to go on unnoticed, and they did a marvelous job. So we hope that everybody who is listening and everybody who's going to share this conversation with others, to encourage everybody to come out and participate, and perhaps something will illuminate in our vision of the future to see things improve. And here I would like to stress, because we cannot always claim that it is them versus us, because as I mentioned in the beginning, racism is found across the board. We have, you see, for you being a Muslim with color, originally from Sudan, I'm sure that sometimes within the Muslim community there are people of European descent, there are people, you know, and sometimes racism shows its ugly head, and you could have experienced racism from within the religious framework. So I'm not, you know, I don't want people to think that we are talking about, you know, blacks of a certain religion, you know, versus whites of a different, no, 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 no. We are saying that racism in all shapes and forms should be dealt with, and we should just continue to advocate for a future, even though now it seems remote, but we would like to believe that God, the Almighty, who created us, is watching us right now and is saying, follow my recipe, and you will have a human family that will have love within it, will have respect. So, Muhammad, you know, I would like to have you say that last you know, bit of this conversation. What's your message to the listeners?
You know, I would really reiterate some of the points that you said and some of the things that I've touched on, which is we all have a responsibility. In particular, us as Muslims, you know, we know the Quran, and we know that we need to do everything we can to support our fellow Londoners and to be great ambassadors. We need to look internally first and recognize that our community is not perfect. So when we see people from Black communities and different communities coming to the mosque, we need to be conscious of how we treat those people when they come into those spaces. The mosque have to be safe spaces, and we all have a responsibility to better understand and have those conversations within our community. Talk to Black Muslim leaders, better understand the issues that they face inside the mosque, and make sure that we can move forward together. So we have the work that needs to be done at home, the mosque, and the work that needs to be done outside our doors, you know, and making sure that we can tackle anti-Black racism. Whether that means you choose to support at home, virtually, tweeting, posting, or whether you, as we're very good at making zakat and donations to causes that you believe in, that need your support. You know, there's a lot of Black groups in our city that, you know, could receive donations that, you know, you might want to consider looking at supporting. Better educating yourself, making sure you're doing your part. Following elections, you know, the next municipal election that comes up, understanding where people stand on issues and things like that, and making sure that you're involved, asking those difficult questions, being active, whether it's on committees that belong to the city, whether it's on boards and commissions across our city. It's important to show up and to make the space sometimes for ourselves, so that, you know, our voices are heard at the table, and make sure that we can move forward, inshallah.
You know, as I always say when I see you, I'm very proud of you. And I'm sure that, you know, people who know you, you know, they have the same feeling. And I hope that, you know, being as young as you are, you know, that you will continue to push forward. And I'm sure that the future belongs to you and people who will advocate for this cause. Thank you very, very much, Muhammad, for giving us the time to pre-record this conversation. I'm sure that it will inspire many, many people, and we will, inshallah, meet on Saturday at 3 o'clock at Victoria Park.
Inshallah. Thank you for having me.
Okay, it's a pleasure. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.